January 31st, 1943, 700 hours, Central Stalingrad, the cellar of the Univermag department store turned headquarters. Frost crawling along broken tiles, and candle stubs guttering in draughts that hiss like snakes. Cold owns the breath of men. The last radios cough and fade, while the walls sweat with the smell of carbolic, paraffin, and unwashed wool. And outside the shattered display windows the city lies in slabs of brick and twisted rebar under a white crust of hoarfrost. Rubble has a taste. An assault group from 64th Army moves along the arcaded street. PP 41s cradled. RGD, 33 grenades, clipped to belts. Ducking past snow, lipped craters toward the stairs that lead below the ruined counters, and mannequins. Footsteps decide endings. In the cellar, Colonel General Friedrich Paulus sits pale and exhausted beside his chief of staff, General Arthur Schmidt. Maps piled like fallen leaves around a telephone that no longer rings, the air broken by the occasional crackle of a dying field set. Silence is the loudest sound. They have been here since the last airfield fell. Potomnik on January 16. Gumrak a week later. After Luftflotte 4s, He-111s, and Ju-52s delivered only a fraction of the hundreds of tons the 6th Army needed daily to live and fight. Hunger outlived hope. The city of Stalingrad is no longer a city. War correspondent Vasily Grossman had written months earlier. By day it is an enormous cloud of burning, blinding smoke, a vast furnace lit by the reflection of the flames. Hell had an address. Now the flames are mostly out, replaced by a dry, iron cold that splits fingers and bursts canteens, by horseflesh boiled with stray oats in dented mess tins, by bread rations shaved to almost nothing and eaten in the dark. Starvation is a routine. In the smoke-laced autumn, German squads called it Verdun on the Volga, as they fought room to room for the tractor factory, the barricade, the Red October steel works, wrestled by the 62nd Army of General Vasily Chuikov one stairwell at a time. Pride met brick. Back then it was still possible to believe in a city, cut in half and a river forced, in a final shove to the waterline. Now the fights are over cellar corners and the last morphine syrettes. Illusion shrank to inches. A week ago, Berlin's voice came thin and absolute across the snow and static. Surrender is forbidden. 6th Army will hold their positions to the last man and the last round. Orders froze harder than skin. The men in the Kessel count cartridges and calories as the thermometer falls. Rags wrapped around boots. Rifles stiff with oil turned to varnish. Eyes filmed with fever beneath caps rhymed white. Winter does not take prisoners. Outside the Univermag the Volga is a slate ribbon hammered flat by wind. Soviet guns posted in echelons on the far bank, and along the northern factory zone, firing by map and memory at places where men still gather heat. The river watches. The routes that mattered closed weeks ago, the Don crossings at Kaluch seized on November 23, when the pincers of Operation Uranus met. Romanian lines crushed on the flanks, the steppe sealing the 6th Army like a lid. A trap became a world. In the darkness of the basement Paulus, adjutant smooths a tunic and clears his throat as boots thud on the stairs above. The candles pop, and somewhere a cracked enamel basin skitters across stone as a body shifts. Nerves have weight. They remember August dust and bright skies, and the ease with which maps once promised streets and factories in neat rectangles. Promises that died against men who fought for beams and bricks under a slogan chalked on a wall. There is no land beyond the Volga. Faith learned to bleed. Now, as the door opens and the cold rolls in with the smell of cordite and wet felt, the Soviets enter with faces wind-burned and eyes red, rimmed from weeks of smoke, their submachine guns glinting dull, where the frost hasn't found them yet. Reality steps through. One Soviet officer speaks in clipped syllables, another lays a paper on the table, and Paulus, promoted to Field Marshal the day before by F.U. Herr, who expected a suicide over a signature, looks not at the men but at the map where the last blue arrows end in white. Titles mean nothing to hunger. Above ground, the ruins hold faces turned grey and thin, men of the Wehrmacht 6th Army, not SS Panzer regiments, not parade ground elites, who have fought, burrowed, burned, and finally waited for a relief that never came. Myths do not warm hands. The assault group waits for a nod, the candles breathe once and bow, and the city groans as if shifting its bones under the snow, while somewhere on the ridge a single gun fires and echoes, 3 times between skeleton walls. An empire exhales. Stalingrad's winter morning stands perfectly still as the pen scratches, the boots creak, and the wind hawks ice down the open stairwell to meet the smell of paraffin and horse broth. The furnace has frozen over. Summer 1942 opened with Case Blue. Army Group South splitting into A for the Caucasus Oil and B for the Volga, with 6th Army, Polis, and 4th Panzer Army, the Hoth, sliding east toward a name that would soon mean famine and brick dust. Ambition mapped itself to a river. The target was a logistics artery as much as a city. Stalingrad's wharves tying Siberian grain and Caucasus fuel to the Red Army's heart, its factories stamped Tractor, Barricade, and Red October along a 30-kilometre ribbon of smokestacks. Destroy the flow, weaken the will. On August 23, Luftflotte 4 lit the horizon with a mass raid that turned whole districts to cinders, Ju-88s and He-111s dropping high explosive and incendiaries into streets that burned for days under a dry wind. Fire made streets into traps. German advance guards pushed in with assault groups. Pioneers, flamethrowers, demolition charges, while XIV Panzer Corps nosed along the northern factories, and LI Army Corps ground forward through the workers' districts to the river bends. Steel met brick. The Soviet defense hardened around 62nd Army under General Vasily Chvikov and 64th Army under Mikhail Shumilov, with reinforcement by night across the Volga under artillery cover and the Volga flotilla smoke. Survival road ferries. Not one step back. Order No. 2Hu-27 had rung out in July, and in Stalingrad it became a method press close. Hugging. The enemy, so Stukas and artillery, could not find clean shots without killing their own. Proximity dulled the blade. Rodimtsev's 13th Guards Rifle Division crossed under fire on the 14-15 September, straight into the central district, and a chalked slogan on a wall gave the city its vow. There is no land beyond the Volga. A sentence became a shield. German commanders believed weight would finish the job. Stukas in screaming dives, 88s levelled for street work, and battalion after battalion fed into blocks labelled on staff maps like chess squares. Confidence mistook rubble for surrender. Soviet tactics split the board, turning buildings into strongpoints, basements into ambushes, and courtyards into kill sacks. The PP-ish 41 chattered at close range, while sappers tunnelled under walls to appear where geometry said they could not. Ratenkrig made maps lie. The city became a duel of factories. Tractor Barricade. Red October, where foundry sands stuck to blood and men fought for gantries and cranes beneath roof skeletons filled with soot. Industry learned to breathe war. By October, both armies were exhausted in the ruins. Yet on the steppe a larger shape was building, the Soviet counterstroke that would not hit the city at all but its brittle flanks. Relief would come as encirclement. Marshals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky coordinated 3 fronts: southwestern Vatutin, Don Rokossovsky, and Stalingrad Seven Yeremenko, to launch Operation Uranus on 19th of November against the Romanian Third Army north of the city and the Romanian Fourth Army to the south. The knife would cut the handle, not the blade. Romanian lines, thin in anti-tank defence and short of winter kit, broke under massed armour and guns, 1st Guards Army, 5th Tank Army, and 51st Army punching inward until the jaws met near Kalitsch on 23rd November. The lid shut fast. Inside the pocket, Kessel, the trapped force, was more than Germans' elements of 6th Army, parts of 4th Panzer Army, Luftwaffe ground crews, and Allied units totalling over 200,000 men hemmed in across frozen factory yards and steppe. An army became an island. Hitler forbade breakout and promised an air bridge, Göring assuring 500 tons a day, while the 6th Army's quartermasters calculated they needed 700 to 800 tons. Fuel, ammunition, food. Just to stand still. Math turned into hunger. In practice, winter fog, iced runways, and Soviet fighters kept deliveries to a fraction, often under 120 tons per day, occasionally spiking higher, but never enough, while Potomnik and then Gumrak airfields fell under artillery arcs. Air could not feed despair. Richthofen wrote in his diary that the idea of full air supply was impossible, a judgment sharpened by flight lists of Ju-52s, and he won 111s that did not come back. Reality bled through paper. Outside the ring, Manstein's Army Group Don built a relief. Operation Wintergewitter, with LVI Panzer Corps lunging from Kotelnikovo in December 6. Panzer Division cutting north to the Mishakova before Soviet operation. Little Saturn smashed the Italian 8th Army and threatened the relief's flanks. Hope stalled in frost inside. Paulus held to the wireless. Surrender is forbidden. Thudding in from Effe Hauptquartier, while rations shrank to horse meat, bread sawdust, and the thin slosh of thawed snow in mess tins blackened by coal dust. Orders did not warm hands. Soviet Don front under Rokossovsky prepared the ending in artillery and arithmetic, massing thousands of guns and Katyusha. Arteries for Operation Ring, the systematic reduction of the pocket beginning 10th of January 1943. The circle began to tighten. By then the city, that had once been bombed to ash, was sealed in ice. Trench feet rotted in felt boots. MG-34s stiffened in the mornings, and wounded men lay under overcoats that froze into boards before noon. Cold became an enemy rank. The myth in the title bears correction within the truth. SS commanders did not rule the cellars at Stalingrad. Paulus Wehrmacht 6th Army did, under Nazi orders that confused prestige with geography until both were buried under snow. Arrogance wore the wrong uniform. Opposite them, Chuikov's 6th Second Army kept its line on the Volga bank with ferries under fire, mortars cached in basements, and snipers who learned the light in every ruined window. Behind them, the fronts that mattered were already over the horizon. Patience had teeth. The city bled both armies white, yet the decision came from the steppe. From the choice to break the flanks and starve the centre rather than smash the ruins head on. A choice written in fuel columns, frost, and the coiled spring of artillery waiting in snow pits. Encirclement proved colder than courage. And when the pocket finally split into northern and southern halves, and the Univermag's cellar turned into a last office, it was not shock that ended the fighting, but the long, dull grind of numbers and winter against men. The river's wind carried the smell of ash and horse broth through broken glass. Stalingrad turned two different machines of war against each other. Germany's precision drill of air, ground assault, and the Soviet engine of attrition, deception and close quarter grip, until steel met brick and only one could still breathe. Systems learned to suffer. German assault doctrine entered the city with Sturmpioneer detachments, flamethrowers, bundled-style Handgranaten, Sig-33 infantry guns, and Stuhlglasser assault guns to batter apertures before infantry rushed the breach. Urban war became a toolkit. The method needed space for Stukas and 88s to finish the job, but Chuikov's 62nd Army stole that space by hugging the enemy. Posts pushed within grenade, throw command posts in cellars, and lines so close that Luftwaffe bombs risked their own. Proximity blunted precision. The only way was to grip them by the belt, Chukov later wrote, describing the deliberate choice to collapse the no-fire zone to arm's length. Doctrine turned tactile. Weapons matched the distance Soviet PP-41s, simple blowback submachine guns with 71 round drums and rates near 900 rounds per minute filled stairwells with a harsh, mechanical buzz, while DP-27s thumped from doorframes like metronomes. Sound measured range. German squads answered with MP-40s, MG-34s, and rifle grenades, using truss work and sewer runs to flank across courtyards that had become moonscapes. Pioneers cut mouse. Holes through party walls to advance room by room. Holes replaced streets. Snipers made an economy of bullets. Mosin Nagant 91 330s with PU scopes, watching alleys where steam rose from burst pipes, while German spotters countered with glass and patience of their own. Stillness became lethal. Factories turned into fortresses at Red October and Barricade. Gantry cranes and casting pits became trenches, and rail spurs offered covered approaches for platoons dragging Maxim guns and crates of 7.62 through Soot. Industry provided angles, the Luftwaffe's instrument, Ju-87B dive bombers with dive brakes and 500 Tarja centerline loads. He-111s and Ju-80As with pattern bombing could pulverize blocks, yet rubble punished the attacker more, erasing lanes, masking targets, and multiplying ambush sites. Power fed resistance. As winter closed, the German machine depended on a promise of air. Ju-502 Psi-3M transports lifting roughly 2 tons per sortie, and He-111s pressed into cargo duty, flying from Morozovskaya and Tatsinskaya into Potomnik and Gomrak. Hope rode on payload. The numbers were uncompromising. 6th Army needed on the order of 700–800 tons per day to fight and eat. Luftflotte 4 rarely delivered a fraction through fog, Soviet fighters, and iced strips that swallowed landing runs in white. Arithmetic starved men. General Wolfram von Richthofen's diary judged the scheme. Impossible. The airfields themselves reminding the calculus by catching fire under rocket and shell while sorties fell to weather and yucks. Reality tore promises. Soviet aviation learned the sky over the ruins with IL-2 Shturmovik slashing low and Yak-1s and Leji 3S hunting transports in the lanes to Potomnik. 8th Air Army flew the same brutal circuits in reverse at night, ferrying men and ammunition across the Volga under tracer and drifting smoke. Air became a contested artery. On the steppe, the counterstroke had its own machine Maskirovka to hide marshalling areas, radio silence, night road movements, and bridging trains that threw pontoons over the Don in hours. Concealment-powered movement. Operation Uranus was artillery-led. ZS-376.2 mm divisional guns, 120 Dinunum and 152 mm howitzers, and BM-13 Katyusha rocket batteries massed in belts, cracking the Romanian flanks that lacked depth and anti-tank density. Weight broke brittle lines. Artillery is the god of war, Stalin had declared, a maxim made practical in barrage tables that rolled forward by minute and map grid until armour and cavalry broke through and ran the open distances between rivers. T3 Vortex 76 with 500 HP PV2 diesels, 76.2 man of 34 guns, and sloped 45 Mayabanra's armour moved as winter took hold, running when the thermometer punished carburetors and tin oil cans alike. Even when the city trapped armour, the steppe kept it decisive. Engines favoured cold. Inside the pocket, the German machine frayed into expedients. Captured PPS slung on German webbing, Jebolteladung. Bundles for killing T-34s in alleys. Field kitchens run on coal dust and scraped timber. Horseflesh boiled with barley. Improvisation replaced supply. Winter was a weapon with its own spec sheet. Valenki felt boots and quilted telegreka jackets on Soviet troops, while many Germans marched in summer leather, wool coats thin and oiled bolts stiffening unless heated over candles. Clothing chose survival. Soviet command posts moved by wire through rubble. with runners and field telephones spliced and re-spliced, while German nets inside the Kessel crackled shorter, thinner, until batteries and sets turned to mutes in the frost. Voices failed before courage. When Tatsinskaya fell to a Soviet tank raid in late December, scores of transports died on the ground, and the bridge of air shrank further, a physical tear in the only line that still promised the 6th Army calories and cartridges. A runway ended a gamble. Operation Ring, the finale, was engineering on a map. Thousands of guns registered on shrinking boxes, counter, battery radars not yet born replaced by raw practice, and infantry echelons stepping forward behind curtains of steel. Reduction became ritual. German doctrine in the ruins had been to compress, hold, and wait for Hoth's relief along the Mishkova. Soviet doctrine was to isolate, starve, and shatter by calibrated blows while keeping the Volga lifeline open at night. One plan needed time, the other took it away. By January, the machines had answered each other: the precision air, ground assault versus close, in defense, airlift arithmetic versus winter physics, fortress industry versus massed artillery, radio nets versus wire and runners. Only one still worked. Dawn, 19 November 1942. North, west of Stalingrad, near Serafimovich and Kletskaya, low cloud pressed to the steppe, and a crust of snow the colour of steel. Fog hides the knife. At Euro 7:20 the horizon erupts. Thousands of guns and mortars from southwestern and Don fronts opening in a rolling barrage. BM-13, Stalin's organs, wailing as their rockets shear the air into ribbons. The earth turns to a drum. Romanian Athur and IV Army Corps, thin on anti-tank guns and winter clothing, brace in trenches that disintegrate under 76.2 mm and 122 mm shell burst. Telephone lines snapping like violin strings in the frost. Defense becomes silence. Soviet infantry rise from white folds and move behind the fire curtain, with tank corps in wedge behind them, T-34s shuddering as tracks bite frozen turf and exhaust smoke like furnace mouths. Wait follows shock. A German liaison officer scribbles in a log that the line is Durchbrochen, broken, while Romanian batteries fire until breech blocks glow and crews flinch from heat that does not spread to fingers. Paper cannot stop steel. On the 20th of November, the southern pincer begins, Stalingrad front smashing into the Romanian 4th Army south of the city. Artillery again the opening sentence, armour the emphatic clause that follows. The jaws take shape. Across 2 days the fog lifts, and the steppe reveals columns that do not end. Tank brigades and mechanized corps, carving toward Kalak and Savetsky, bypassing strong points to reach roads and bridges. Speed becomes plan. Inside Stalingrad, German assault groups pushing through Red October and barricade hear a new sound in the pauses between firefights. Distant, steady thunder on the flanks where the maps had been comfortable. Confidence phrase at the edges. Why must hold them by the belt? General Vasily Chukov had written of his city fighting creed, and, now, beyond the ruins, other hands grip the enemy's seams where belts do not reach. Doctrine scales to the steppe. South of the Don, a bridge at Kalach becomes a magnet for movement. Rear echelons, fuel trucks, and medical lorries funneled to a crossing that T-34s now approach from directions no one in German rear areas expected. Rear turns into front. Forward Soviet tanks burst from scrub onto the road, gunners firing short at silhouettes that lurch and pivot, and drivers jam throttles as a column tries to reverse across a span already under 76 mm and fire. Surprise lives in seconds. By midday on the 23rd of November, armoured spearheads from north and south find each other near Savetsky and Kalak, antennas whipping in the wind as commanders climb from hatches to wave and swear through frost. A circle closes. Yeremenko and Rokossovsky transmit to Stiakar that the enemy Stalingrad grouping is encircled, the simple report turning a battlefield into a geometry problem with only one answer. The ring is real. In the Univomag's basement, the 6th Army staff marks it with a pencil and a pause. The line that used to run west now runs around, and the only air on the map is a promise already thinned by weather and fighters. Hope shrinks to asterisk. The first German signals say what the ears already know. Army ingeschlossen. As divisional nets choke with calls for fuel and orders that conflict in their haste. Words taste of metal. Shortly after, the FU Hauptquartier speaks in tones that ignore distance and temperature. Surrender is forbidden. Hold Stalingrad to the last man and the last bullet. Orders outrun physics. In the ruins, the same squads that had fought room to room now crouch over coals to hear the new shape of the war. Manstein will come from Kotelnikovo. The air will bring bread and ammunition. The river will keep freezing, but never hard enough to carry trucks. Belief looks for a bridge. Out on the steppe, the Soviet fronts pivot to the second mission. Turn the circle into a vise. While supply columns pour forward. Road slides sanded with ash. Pontoon trains clattering toward new river lines, the map names in small print. Momentum learns discipline. Inside the Kessel, Potomnik and then Gumrak airstrips draw fire like lightning rods, Ju-52s, and He-111s ghost in with frost on their wings. Unload sacks and crates already too few by the numbers in quartermaster's hands. Arithmetic becomes fate. A German infantryman writes home that the snow is everywhere inside his greatcoat, that he cannot remember warmth, that the sky never stops growling, and that the rumour of rescue carries like smoke. Letters lean on lies. Soviet troops in white smocks move at night to pinch smaller pockets from the bigger one, cutting roads with 80 guns sunk in snow and turning shelters into traps with a few mortar rounds and a charge. The noose learns patience. For men who had believed the Volga was a finish line, the new front is all around. North at the tractor factory, west across the steppe, south beyond the Sara lakes, and east where the river runs black under wind. Direction loses meaning. Civilians and wounded crowd cellars that smell of paraffin and horsefart, while medics ration morphine and tear cloth with teeth. The air bridge lands less and less often, and the sound of tanks at night is now always on the outside. Isolation tolls like a bell. On the radios that still wake, staff officers in Stalingrad and Rostov talk past each other in phrases that grow thinner each day. Stand fast, hold, wait, while Soviet artillery staffs plot smaller rectangles on acetate overlays. Language exhausts before ammunition. The realization comes not as a shout, but as a long intake of breath that fogs a window no one can see through anyway. The plate has been appended. The food will not arrive, and the way out is a line on a map with arrows pointing inward. Shock is quiet. When the Soviet spearheads shook hands at Kalak, the 6th Army ceased to be a force that could maneuver and became a place that could be reduced. And disbelief froze into the rubble with them.